Are you the image or are you the witness? Are you consciousness? What ego? How does it come into being? Those are the more profound, real questions in relationship to this notion of ego death. Because as you're speaking of, I'm hearing you acknowledging the layers of presumptions about identity. And the name, as we know, there's all the chakras, and there's different forms of identity and association with the chakras. That the structure of experience in relationship to a presumed identity as we are structurally embodied in the mechanism or the entity that is merely arising. We coincide with it, consciousness itself. And there's the identification, the mechanism of identification. And then so depending on where energy and attention gravitates towards, that's the sense of ego identity. And as we've discussed numerous times, and it's been pointed to in different traditions using different terms, you can feel some kind of liberation or freedom from a knot in a certain aspect of that structural being. And you can call that freedom. You could call that a death of a sense of identity associated with that level or reverberation of manifest light. And then you can feel a liberation because you have felt freed. But is it complete? Is it fully true? Is it absolute? And putting even words to it in that regard is limiting, as great realizers and any true practitioners of any stage of development will say. And as you describe, there is in the realizations that are most profound relative to the nature of this condition and how it is arising, is when it's most profound and irrevocable. There was no you that surrendered. There was only the force of the imposition of the realization or the truth that is actually liberating. And that's the real divine process that is associated with the self position and the light, the unmanifest light and the self position. And that, and those, like you were saying, people can have those kinds of experiences associated with either substances or mediated by virtue of some sort of technique, some sort of practice, some sort of transmission. And it's not that any of that is negative in terms of an experiential sense, particularly if there's a heart that is really true in its yearning and true in its impulse. But the key is not stopping in the is this sufficient? How honest are you willing to be with yourself as a presumed identity? Is this sufficient?
Well, this is also no small matter.
No.
This is what the world is based upon. Magnified since the Renaissance and scientific revolution and all of that stuff, where the self has become supreme, or the individual or the mind has come supreme, and now we have artificial intelligence and the robots are going to control whatever. But this is really this is what, as he says, this is what runs the world as it is presently operating.
Yes.
So this is not a small matter.
No.
And it's not just a
it's really pressing in, like really pressing in. And because of the vast awareness that people have now relative to all possibilities, so many voices are coming onto the stage, wanting to be heard relative to this world event.
Yeah. And so this is what's kind of generating the modernity and all this new stuff that's kind of capturing the imagination and the hopes and the dreams and the aspirations and the prayers
Mm,
of people.
yes. Yeah. Yearning. Mm,
You know,
mm,
well, every time I come into these kinds of conversations, at least in the literature, you're always up against hope and fear. It's
mm,
kind of
mm,
where we are today. You know,
mm, mm, mm.
um, faith and nihilism, these kinds of, we're coming into a crunch time.
Mm,
And so
mm.
all of this is rising to the conversation,
Yes.
although it's mediated through all whatever social sciences, ecology, economics, war, militarism, racial identity, sexual identity, all these identities. And
And the identities of the seekers too, that put on the costume through various forms of experience or yogic, spiritual, religious, transcendental techniques.
yeah, and this is, I mean, for me, I'm associated so much now that I'm in the world of, I'm not doing these substances anymore, but I'm very much associated with the whole psychedelic or the psilocybin or the LSD, MDMA, all these chemicals, plants, or synthetic substances that people are now using to one degree or another, minor degree, for microdosing and therapy and things of that sort, or to larger um, degrees and larger quantities. And I mean, it's a huge happening in today's world because it's back on the main shelf of, well, it isn't quite legal, but is quasi-legal, breakthrough licensing and
Mm.
breakthrough technologies, and the pharmaceutical industry is definitely on board with all of this stuff. And
Yeah.
so anyway,
When you,
so
well, but when you're saying that, I'm sort of giggling because I notice that, and as we probably all notice, the AI technology and its mathematical capability for putting anything in front of your face, if you happen to search or mention a word, or you think that you're being watched by Big Brother, as if they know everything that you're doing. But what makes me laugh about it is that in I've what has come into my field of view is these archaeological digs that are happening. And they're finding, either through writing or through visual images and traditional art, where they're recognizing that many of these ancient cultures made use of these substances. And so, and it's like, talk about, yeah, okay, there you go. Yeah.
well, what the archaeologists have found out, and what he is shaking the classical world, is now
Right.
they've been able to, through this, I mean, technology today is amazing. They're finding old vessels, old jugs and containers, and they wanted to know what is in the container. And there's still some kind of, you know, archaeological remains of the substances that were in these containers. And they're
Yes.
finding things and they're tracking them to Eleusis in Greece. And they're now,
Mm.
and this is really what's discovering is that chemically the analysis is very similar to LSD. And
Yeah.
so then you get back into the story of grains and ergot, and so now, I mean, the research with him and Rush over here at Boston University, they have the classicalists, spinning on their their belief that their foundation is being shattered because these
Yes.
substances are now becoming clear that they were used anciently by many, many, many different cultures. And basically the foundation of Western civilization is based on these sacraments
Mm,
that were associated, that everybody in Greece at one period of time, once a lifetime, would go to Eleusis and partake. And then Christianity arises, and then the first thing they start to do is destroy parts of these sacred temples and, getting rid of these old stories. By the 3rd century, and everything's been Alexandria has been destroyed, the library, he says we have 1% of the information that was held in these old libraries and periods of time, but we're basing our understanding, at least our sense of the Western tradition, on a very, very small fragment of our
mm,
our documents, or
yes,
Plato or
yes,
whoever.
yes.
Anyway,
So when I hear you speaking about the details of all of this, the cyclical nature comes to mind and understanding relative to, we think we're so brilliant because technologically we come up with something that seems to be new. And yet the dramatization in the realm of possibilities, and also the potential reaction, whether you are attracted to it or you're repelled against it, these two motions, and what you were also speaking about earlier, is that it's this dichotomy that will keep the machine perpetually in motion, and will just come up with relating to all these different same possibilities through different means. And what is exactly the point of it? What is actually being learned? What is the truth in relationship to it? Who are we in relationship to it? What is this event altogether? Rather than getting on the merry-go-round and just constantly presuming that we're somehow different than what happened in the past or what's going to happen in the future. One of the things that I appreciated about Trungpa when I studied some of the material that you have up on B-Zone was his description of the Bardos and death, and that he was indicating that what's occurring is that people aren't asking the right questions. They're getting off into, are there aliens? Is there another possibility? Are there alternatives? But don't want to stay in the process of actually the paradox of the situation that we find ourselves in, for that satori to occur, for the breakthrough of some kind of real insight in relationship to the questions that are most profound.
yeah.
And the reason for that is because of energy and attention being locked in this presumption of identity.
Right. And Trungpa called it people taking these ideas, and he called it spiritual materialism, meaning
Yes.
that you may speak of these high places and these awakenings, but you're still in the material understanding of that. You're still materially based. You haven't really breaking through. You haven't transcended, at least into the different levels of what he's referring to in the different koshas of the different Dharmakaya, Sambhogakaya, and Nirmanakaya. These levels that are associated with understanding. So, that's why today the information is all out there. Experiences can be had through these various substances or literature or prayer or dance or sex or whatever. And transcendences of your sense of self. But there's a fundamental, deeper sense of yourself that's still locked in the material identity with an ego, within a sense of myself. So you can
Yeah, so
travel. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So this goes back to what this matter of ego death in relationship to the sense that the freedom from the knot in the navel, then the understanding that I is not the navel. I is not trapped in the
Is
and you
it
can
not the body, not the body?
yeah, you can equate that with the gross, the bodies, the gross subtle or the causal, and so there's that freedom from sense of gross identity, but and then but it, and it's and again then the experience that you describe and as Adida expresses and other realizers would speak about in their own unique way is that the heart is the actual platform because that's the self position and there's the gross subtle and causal in the domain of the heart, the horizontal, and that's the passageway through which consciousness in the Amrita nadi, consciousness and energy coincides, and it goes then from the gross to the subtle and the causal sense of identity, and each of those must be transcended in order to realize the prior condition of consciousness consciousness itself. Well, so that's the ego death, the actual ego death, not as an entity, because there is the subtle, gross, subtle, and causal entities. It's all arising. These things will continue to arise, and being in a body mind, you will continually make the error of identification with the various forms of possibilities in those realms in a body. You don't have to leave it, actually, to experience these things. As you say, it's a whole body that's always going to be requiring you to have to address it as a whole in relationship to what true freedom is. But the death, as Adida speaks about, what became your understanding as what true ego death is.
Well, to go back to my experiences, as I now understand after 40 years later, is that it just broke me through that first. I mean, no small matter for me, but it broke me through the identification with the body. So all the other parts of what you're referring to still were not even understood or recognized. So
Right.
this only brought me to the beginning of the process. This was never a final event, although it seemed there was a breakthrough or transcendence, as I learned the term now. But it wasn't anything other than a freedom from the identification with the body, but not only the identification with the body, the identification with what the hell the world was about, what was going on.
Right.
So there was no kind of, the feeling was in the central part of the heart, but there's no visions associated with it. There was no the third eye didn't open and travel, although the third eye was the channel by which this occurred, but it wasn't developed in that sense. So it was the initial, and that's why I think the first couple of talks we had was the beginning of spiritual life.
Yes. So, and that's important to comprehend in relationship to what you wrote, because depending upon your presumption or point of view, you can read something like this and come away with a completely different understanding of it, unless you understand the one who wrote it, and what it is that you experienced and what it is you studied and what the context is, and then how you continue to grow in your own process relative to that, what you were recognizing, what you were understanding, and what you were continuing from the heart impulse towards. Those are the fundamental matters of the process of liberation or awakening. is combined with, yes, direct experience, but also wisdom that comes into your field through study, through people, through teachers, through masters, through life itself altogether.
And also the sense that you are no longer alone in the process, that it's very paradoxical, but now you understand that there's something else happening that is
Yeah.
far beyond your comprehension, that there's a guidance, if you will, there's something happening, right? And so, but the paradox is that there's no place to go.
Mm. Mm.
And part of the experience was that you were home,
Mm.
that there was no place to go.
Mm.
So it's very paradoxical. So
Mm.
why would you go anywhere else? You've gotten this sense of the search is gone.
Mm.
Now the development of one's persona, the social matrix of existence, the identities that you were previously locked into, the sense of them, who you were, still were in the field of where you were. You didn't leave the planet. You didn't leave your address and telephone number. Now, the relationship to those items and the people and everything else was very much different.
Yes.
But
yeah.
it wasn't like, oh, now I got to go do something, because you were home.
Mm. Mm.
And so, you know, that's where, for me, I really said, okay, there's something, I better start meditating. I better start doing something to get a sense, because there's something deeper happening here. And I'm not even closely connected to understanding anything here. Right?
Yeah. So you were given a glimpse, like you saw the light. And that's when as you say, the light is always on. The light is what is attractive. And it is in this psychophysical mechanism, because the source condition is the context within which, and the light itself is the very fabric, is the unqualified, it is light itself, is the nature of everything that is manifesting in truth. And so that getting a glimpse of that is nectar. It is the nectar that brings you home. It liberates you from the sense of being confined. So the passageway into the fourth stage of the spirit, just beyond the gross, is significant. And this is where humanity has not actually, as even cognitively aware, and it is still in argument with that fact that we are not simply grossly embodied mechanisms, and when you're dead, you're dead. And when you're alive, all you're experiencing is brain phenomena and nothing else.
And nor is it accepted even to speak about these things. Because if you're in prison and somebody says they're not in prison, they're going to put you in prison. When you break through all these things that are confining and identifying people, people are identified with this world and the politics and the history, and they're deeply associated with it. So as soon as somebody breaks out of that to some degree, it kind of elbows them and says, hey, you know something? This isn't, lighten up, take it easy. This isn't so rich. Oh, what do you mean? What are you talking about? No. then you become outside. You're kind of like an outsider.
mm, mm, mm,
It's
mm.
like if you're trying to if you're around a bunch of drinkers
Mm.
and they say, "Hey, have a drink," you say, "No, I'm not drinking."
Right.
What's your problem? You're outside the circle. You're outside the consensus. You're outside the illusion that people are very much identified with.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
once
Yeah.
somebody starts to break away from that,
Mm, mm, mm.
you are a threat. Now,
Yes. Yes.
in a
Yeah.
social environment, that might be fine, but when you're in a psychological environment,
Mm,
and you start to speak in different ways and different terms,
mm,
well, now you may be considered a little mad. You may be considered um, kind of psychotic or schizophrenic or whatever.
mm,
You are
mm.
now breaking through these very, very sacred models that are really are, you don't even mention any of this stuff.
Yes. And to take that a little bit further, some people do find individuals like that attractive. And so you do have seekers who might, their ears might perk up, their interests might go, oh, I want some of that. What is it that you're speaking of? You know, be my guide, be my teacher.
See,
And oh, wow,
there,
I
that,
even feel interesting. I even feel this energy coming from you. I want what you got. Gimme, gimme, gimme.
there,
Your transmission. Yeah.
that was something that I definitely various times. I'm not making stuff up. I mean, I was in India and people started to come to me and says, "You're my guru,"
Right.
and I'm going, "No, I'm not. I
Mm,
am not your guru." Oh, yes, you are. No, this is where you really get really hairy. This gets hairy because people start coming, not everybody, but people come to you.
mm,
They see a light, they feel something, you say, I don't know what it is, but there's some attraction because of the
mm,
freedom or whatever.
mm,
And people start to come to you. And then I know lots of people who put themselves up as teachers because
mm,
people went to them. And I remember Ramdas saying when he came back from India, he was just sitting under a tree and
mm,
some young kid came up to him, and I'm maybe changing some of the exact words here, but in essence, they said, do you know about it? And they didn't say what the object of that sentence referred to. They just said, do you know about it?
mm,
And Ramdas said, well, it depends on what you mean by what do you mean by that? Well, what
mm.
happened is that he said at that time he could have changed, he could have responded in a different way, but he responded in a way that was inviting for these people to say, oh, you must know something here
Mm,
by
mm,
not
mm,
answering the question. It's a very
mm,
subtle kind of mechanism, but basically what you and your response to people, you start to
mm.
bring them to you by
Yes. Yeah.
playing however it is that you play. And this is
Yeah.
the guru, this is the guru game. This is the teacher game. This is where there's a whole nother level to this that
Yeah.
you start to take on the role of a teacher or a guide or
Yeah.
a guru.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I've seen many, since all the old ones are gone, the new ones who have a bit of understanding have come up
Mm.
to the role. Have come up to the
Of
podium.
course.
So
Inevitably, all of these functions and roles will manifest, and some of them may have some integrity. I would say probably the majority of them actually don't, because they aren't self-aware of what the actual motives are behind what they are doing, and the potential, for lack of better language, collateral damage in terms of an agenda that actually isn't divinely established in the integrity of truth, heart love, true impulse for helping people, really helping them, that doesn't have to do with perpetuating your own role or agenda. That is significant understanding.
And also the you're taking on other people's life karmas. You're taking them on. You're now directing their life because they have now submitted, or to a degree
Yeah.
submitted to you for guidance. So
Yes,
you are
yes,
in fact
yes,
being responsible primarily as if you were to a child. You are
yes.
primarily taking on their karma. And if you don't have the siddhi, SIDDHI, the siddhis that's working in this kind of subtle and causal world dimension we're speaking about, well, guess what? You're going
Yes,
to be like some of these teachers who had to off themselves.
yeah, yes, yes.
It just became too much.
Yeah, and likewise for any spiritual aspirant who or those who take substances, anyone who is seeking an experience of some kind, if you're not in a right relationship to the source and the wisdom that will keep you grounded, it is maddening. It's maddening. And fundamentally, that from what you are expressing in your own life experience, and I can speak so to also, the responsibility entirely rests here with your direct, unmediated, tacit honesty and integrity in relationship to the divine process itself. And that comes through an awakening that's not something that the ego seeks. And this is why I appreciated when you indicated that your confession, or what you were describing, was unmediated and without substances, like acknowledging the divine, the actual divine process that through the impulse of the heart, through the heart yearning, through noticing something's not quite right. There's something that comes in the divine transmission itself is the context within which you will notice there is something beyond, there is something greater than, there is something moving this process. And there are actually people who are incarnate to be able to grant you that more rapidly, more directly. And another thing about this late time is that reality possibility is also taboo and negated, because everybody wants to be their own island unto themselves and presume that they are, even though they're having these extraordinary phenomena, whether yogic, religious, or spiritual, or transcendental, they're still wanting to take it to themselves as a separate self, rather than acknowledging the condition of the native condition of being itself, consciousness itself, and its nature, that is only one, the one and only truth of everyone and everything. And presuming that somehow you can actually associate or affiliate or realize that without the reception of transmission.
Yeah, the ownership. Or the identity. That you may be in a very high state of consciousness. You may have siddhis, you may have transmission capabilities.
Yes. And so to communicate to others, if you're assuming a role, that you can realize this by yourself independently. What integrity does that actually have? What it represents is a limit on indirect realization of the source itself. And then you do end up, which I do appreciate, there are teachers and gurus who are, they inevitably would have to be crazy wise, paradoxical, because that puts responsibility to the one who is the seeker and undoes the seeking itself through that realization coming from a place that cannot be caused by the separate self or through any experience that the separate self may have.
I'm reminded of, Trungpa married a young British woman.
Mm.
And she's written a book, slips my mind, Thunder, something along the lines of Thunder. Well, in it, she talks about when he, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, was feeling that he was becoming enlightened. He confessed to her, he says, I don't know if I'm becoming enlightened or I'm going mad.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning that, he had reached a certain capacity and a power. There's no two ways about his siddhis.
Mm-hmm.
But you're really dealing with some very, very, very subtle and powerful forces when we're speaking about these levels of consciousness. These are not just downtown kind of, I had a good LSD experience. These are profound occasions that we're speaking about.
Yes. And when this passageway into the fourth stage understanding of the nature of this unity, and particularly when you have the cosmic consciousness, the understanding that this all of what we experience is entirely a profoundly significant force of spirit being, entering into that world in which things move and happen and manifest, and how prayer works and how magic works and how puja works and how ritual works, and that these things are real. They're nothing to mess around with at all. Healing, all of this, that you have to be very careful in terms of your actual capabilities to function effectively and auspiciously and with good intent, true heart intent, true love itself, to be able to serve in that capacity. And some people may be able to do that and some not. And the same goes with any aspect of experiential realization. It's not, as you're indicating, it is nothing to mess around with at all.
No, it's a fire. It's a fire. And it's a double-edged sword in the Tibetan tradition, where Manjushri is cutting through wisdom and compassion, meaning he cut through the bullshit, the wisdom and discrimination. But then, you come back, this double-edged sword comes back here to the one who's wielding the double-edged sword, wisdom and compassion. They have to be synced back and forth. They go hand in hand.
Yes, and this is where I can speak forever in detail about Adidada and my direct physicality and every level of being observing this process in him and his work with beings and with the world, and the ramifications of that, which talk about a fire and a powerhouse, and also with the bliss of it that is, in my direct reception, is unparalleled, because I have had these various phenomenal experiences, unmediated at times, mediated at times, intoxicants at times, no intoxicants at times, in the world, at a job, in the temple, not in the temple. I mean, all of it, and nothing is more important than feeling discrimination, the intelligence of the heart that is given relative to never rest on the whole of separate self identity in any level of the being, and presume that you have any right to interfere with anyone else's life. Woo! Not to be done.
Oh.
Everyone is so precious, and so their process is simply their own sense of self, or their entity or being, or as they manifest, is just a vessel or an armature for the divine process, the actual real divine process to take hold, and to respect that.
Well, this is the trap that people have, is that they do have a certain capacity to articulate. They may have some cities, they may have some kind of charisma, they do attract people, they do have artistic abilities, music abilities, all different abilities that are powerful in the world that attract people to them. And so then they become the artist, the professor, the guru, whatever. And this is the way the world operates at different levels and different dimensions, that there's many different ways in which people bind themselves to one another for various reasons, and some good, some not so good. And this is where, like you were saying, discrimination is absolutely paramount. Otherwise, the old scapegoat game starts to reappear, and then you will hoist this person up, or this individual, or this ideology, or this whatever, and then it fades, and the revolution is collapsed, and next round, and the next person, and this is the cycle of the karmic wheel, that just you're continually reasserting, denying death, Vishnu, and all these cycles that keep on repeating themselves with new hopes and new dreams and another discovery, and maybe we'll find the sacred whatever. And this is where this transcendence is essential to the understanding, because these cycles will continue. And now, unfortunately, the cycles in this time are in a different cycle than they were in the 17th century or the 14th century.
Yeah.
We're in a global period of time here.
Yes.
And if you were following, ancient calendars, definitely the fifth turn of the wheel, or the time had stopped. Time in the prophecies of the world are complete. So this is, as he says, end time.
Kali Yuga, yeah.
It's the end time. This is the breakthrough time, because you have no more future. You can't rely on the future and the planetary indications and the cosmic indications. All of these things have ended, and now you only have present time, or the end time. And it's only in the breakthrough that and the breakthrough has already occurred, but it's only beginning. But until that is understood, everybody's going to be trying to create another new thing. And it's just going to be a repeat of the old. And so, whether it be, AI and the robots, or the machine learning and all of this stuff, it's still, you're putting it in. The information, this machine is just spitting out new possibilities based on what you put into it. You may think the machine is now thinking itself, and it may appear to be that, but it's coming up with a whole nother, aspect of your own garbage in, garbage out. Mind impossibilities, arithmetic, mathematical, fission,
Yeah,
nuclear,
yeah.
uh,
Mm.
it's just we're always looking for the next way out because the whole thing is looking to get out. Nobody wants to deal with this.
Well, Adidas, this is the other world. Everything has already died. This is the other world. I mean, and that's an incredible paradoxical statement. In recognition, response, devotion to the bright, to conscious light, that the paradox is dissolved because there's no more duality. There is only one. There is no other.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And there's no way in and there's no way out.
And no beginning and no end.
You're in the eternal time. And we
Yeah.
are in that eternal moment.
Yeah. And the realization of that is different, is not the same as an experiential glimpse without the
Or
responsibility.
even talking about it, writing
Yeah.
books about it or
Yeah.
words.
And when those who presume that they have, and I don't mean to be nasty about it, or because each individual is a heart at heart. We are one in that recognition. But when those assumptions or presumptions become institutionalized in any aspect of the world and become a force of authority, superimposing on mass millions of people, or even a few in very smaller circles, that is what perpetuates the machine of nature that is created by the ego act. That is a dramatization that actually denies and has forgotten our fundamental position of being itself.
Yeah, and it just falls into the side of, okay, I understand this and I want to take something and I want to make it good. I want to make it, I want to protect this. I want to give it to my children. I want to, I have something sacred here and I'm going to extract it out of the dynamic process of life and integrate it into the dynamic aspect of where there isn't really any
Mm,
separate ownership anywhere.
mm, mm.
So
Right. That's yeah, yeah,
as soon as it's abstracted, as soon as it
yes,
is taken out of,
yes, yes. Abstracted from the self position that is true of everyone and everything. So when Adidas speaks of I am the one and only, that's what he's speaking of. It's not applied to a separate self as an other at all. And this is something like in living intimately with him, there is nothing other than the ordinary. This is only the ordinary. In radical understanding, the man of understanding, which is how he lived, all of the beauty of the heart that can manifest in simple, ordinary things then becomes a whole different matter because there's no search involved in it. There's no consequence in positive or negative terms. It's simply a right relationship to what is simply arising, and it manifests as love.
and it's the
True love, the
and
integrity of that.
it's the magnification that magnifies. It magnifies that
Yes,
bliss, that
yeah,
love, that light is
yeah,
then allowed to magnify and
yes, yes,
inform and instruct and to
yes,
guide and
yes,
to make
yes,
whole what is already
yes,
the
yes,
case.
yeah. Yeah, recognition, responsive devotion in relationship to everyone and everything, not merely applied to an objective guru.
Now you're maybe stepping on some sacred ground here that
I think, yes, very much so, but it's
yeah.
absolutely true. You're missing the entire point of the the actual practices that are given that are meant to be searchless.
Well, I'm looking at the time. I'm thinking maybe
Yes.
we better.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. Beautiful. Thank you again.
I
Yeah, and
always
thank you,
enjoy.
anybody who is appreciating this. You are with us at heart entirely. So grateful.
Much love to you.
Thank you.